Thank you all for having me and for being here. I'm really excited to talk the next 3 weeks about this crazy topic that I'm sure you've heard nothing about in the news recently. And it should be, I hope, a little kind of introduction to conversation. There is no way that we could possibly cover this topic in 3 weeks. So if we want to keep it going, we'll do 3 years, however long you want to go. But I hope it'll just be kind of the beginning of a conversation. I also want to give a shout out to my friends, the Candler Foundry. Do y'all know the Candler Foundry? If you don't know the Candler Foundry, you are foolish, because what you may not know is that Emory in Atlanta has probably the top theological school in the country. And what the Foundry does is basically take the top talent from that school and make them accessible to the general public. And so if you've not heard about the Candler Foundry or haven't been involved, please talk to Emily or some of the folks here to learn about that, because it really is remarkable. And frankly, I think it is the future of theological education, is this kind of taking it beyond the walls of the university and out into the public. So that's what they do, and they do incredibly well. And so in some ways, I'm here as a member of Trinity, but I'm really here with the Candler Foundry. So thank you to them for doing this. So Christianity and AI, a terrible title for this 3 weeks. I tried to get ChatGPT to give me some more exciting ways to talk about it, but we won't go with those. But we're going to do it for 3 weeks, and so just to kind of orient you to what we're going to do for the first week, we're going to talk about AI and how it is a technology that I would argue is a little bit different than technologies we've faced before. This is probably going to be the least Christian churchy of the 3 weeks. In fact, I talked to my daughter about what I was doing, and she was like, "You're talking about AI? That doesn't even have anything to do with the Bible." So don't tell Rebecca, but we may not even mention the Bible today, but that's okay, because this is all prelude to lots more Bible content coming in the next couple weeks. So here's a picture I took of all of us in church freaking out and worrying about our AI headlines. By the way, pretty much any image I show you today is not a real picture. It's all AI generated. After this week, we will step back in history, and we will say, as I say to my students, this is not the first time the church has had to wrestle with technology. In fact, one of the ways to tell church history would be to look at cultural technological innovations and the way in which the church responded to that. And so we're going to look at some moments in history where I think we can draw some lessons from the ways in which the church has, for good or for bad, adapted to radical innovation such as we are seeing right now. So here's an image of the church wrestling with technology. What I found really interesting about this is the AI is really obsessed with the phonograph. So there's 4 or 5 phonographs here, which, I would argue was a major innovation that the church had to wrestle with, but seems excessive on the phonographs there. Then week 3, we're going to really come back and say, what does this have to do with Christianity? One of the questions that I would like for you to ponder and help me answer is our response as Christians or as a church any different than the general citizenry response? In fact, if you look at the New York Times this very morning, there are 2 big articles about AI. One is people seeking spiritual help through chatbots, and the other is people seeking financial help through chatbots. Are those different? Are we in favor of one, against both, in favor of both? So we're going to talk about whether the response as a Christian community is any different than a general American community. Here's kind of my attempt to get at that. The lighting's a little weird so you can't see, but you have foreboding AI on the top, and you have the people either huddling in fear, or you have the people hugging one another in the warm embrace of AI. I don't know which one we're going to get to, but we'll see. I would argue neither of those are good options. We should probably end up somewhere in the middle. But we'll see. Now, so we're going to start, and we're going to talk just general introduction to AI. I want to say, too, if you have thoughts, questions, concerns throughout, feel free to interrupt me, but we'll also leave some time at the end. Here are some headlines from the last couple of weeks, and this is, of course, one small sample of what you could see. So AI spending frenzy is propping up the real economy. So this real fear that we're in a kind of AI bubble, that all this kind of money has been pumped into these tools, and they're going to collapse. So there's kind of financial fears around AI. Second, there is great concern around mental health, particularly young people, and the way in which AI and other social media type tools are helping or hurting our youth's kind of mental health. Third, college applicants. I have a son who's in the middle of college applicants, and this great concern or fear about everybody using AI to write their college essays. In fact, you already see a lot of colleges kind of moving away from the essay or de-emphasizing it because they recognize that everybody's using this. And then this kind of general, you better be using AI for all aspects of your life. Financial planning, your workload, all of that kind of stuff needs to be AI. So I just want to get you a sense that AI, whatever that term means, is everywhere. And there's a general concern that I probably should know what's going on. So that's what we're going to kind of start to do today. Now, there are 3 basic options to deal with AI. The first is to just pretend it is some weird technology. We've heard of technologies in the past. Not a big deal. We're going to ignore it. I don't think option 1 is going to be a good one for you that we'll talk a little bit about. There is a second option here. That's option 3. Option 2 is we can police this. We can say, and this is what happens often in the academic context, is we say we're worried about plagiarism, so we're going to come up for rules. You cannot use ChatGPT, or you can use it in this particular way. I don't think that's quite helpful. Just to give you a quick reason why, if you came to me and you said, Bo, I think you plagiarized this essay, I think you used ChatGPT, my response to you would be, prove it. And there's absolutely no way you could prove it. This is not the same as using someone else's work because it is generating the text. So I don't think policing it is going to get us out. Now, do y'all know this is Seinfeld? Okay. I use Seinfeld a lot in my teaching, and like in the last 5 or 6 years, we've gotten to a point where the students are like, who is George Costanza? What are you talking about? And it's really a depressing thing, so at least you know. I would argue the best option is to learn and use AI. So one of your pieces of homework for tonight, and there is homework, is I want you all to experience these tools. How many of you have used something like ChatGPT? Great. How many of you used it for something real instead of just like, let me see how funny this is? Okay, less, but some. Okay, I really think it's important, whether you're a parent, a grandparent, or just a general person, to at least understand what these tools are and how they work or don't work. Okay, so here's my kind of challenging plan today. First, we're going to do a quick what is AI. That will be ridiculously quick. Second is how should we approach it, some kind of general framework for making some choices around these tools. Third is I'll give you some examples of how I use the tool in the midst of that framework. And then 4, most importantly, we'll have some discussion and QA. A few caveats that I have to offer. We are talking about a very tiny subset of this general AI world. Just to give you an example, a couple weeks ago, Tom Friedman wrote this piece about the military and AI and how China and the US need to talk to one another. We're not going to touch that, right? There's AI that's out there that's beyond the kind of scope of what we can talk about, but I commend you to think about that. 2, I don't see it as my job to say you should or you shouldn't, or this is good or this is bad. And I would commend this piece to you in The Atlantic about a week ago, which is talking about frameworks for decision making. And that's really going to influence the way I think about this. So it's not this tool is terrible, it's does this tool fit the values and what I'm trying to do? So that's kind of the approach we'll take. 3, in full disclosure, I tend to be on the AI maximalist side. What do I mean by that? I think over the next 4 or 5 years, life is radically going to change because of these tools. Now, I should admit, this has been said a million times ago, right? Like in the 1980s when I was a kid, the world was going to radically change because TV was everywhere or something like that. I think this is different. And I think there are going to be some significant cultural, yes, religious, economic, all kinds of impacts because of some of these tools. If you really want to scare yourself, go read this. This is AI 2027. Anyone read this? Joel has, yeah. This is kind of the maximalist view. And I'm not there, but I do think there's some truth to what they're talking about. And then the 4th point is, even though I'm a maximalist, I think there are some things we need to recover in the midst of this burgeoning digital space. I always tell my children, like, we're in a moment, for example, where there's a really easy win for you, and that is to write handwritten thank you notes, right? And why do you do that? Because no one does that anymore, right? So it's like super easy, and everyone thinks you're amazing. Similarly, I think we are moving to a space where the AI is going to radically change a lot of things, but there's some core skills that I think in the interregnum, if you can really develop those skills, particularly kids, are going to be a kind of leg up on people moving forward. This was a good piece that Clay Shirky wrote in the New York Times about a week and a half ago, talking about the use of blue books in classrooms, because there are particular skills that you can get from writing an essay by hand that you can't get from writing digitally. And so this kind of thing where we need to go back and recover some tools. Okay, sound good for a general roadmap? Everybody's happy? Enough coffee? Okay, good. First question, what is this thing that we call artificial intelligence? So here's an example. On Monday night, I stayed home and watched. Can someone complete that sentence? Monday Night Football, thank you. How in the world did you know that? How did you know what I did on Monday night? Okay, it's something everybody does, right? On Monday night, watching in America, we have all these contextual clues that we understand. To complete this sentence, most likely, the most reasonable response is Monday Night Football, right? This is essentially how these tools work. They have massive sets of data, and they say the most likely next thing, word, sentence, whatever, is, in our case, Monday Night Football. Now, what you probably should realize is like this has been going on for a very long time. So you've seen things like this, right? Why are librarians so rude, important, so hot, paid so much, etc.? This is from, I think, 2007, right? Now, obviously, all of these things are still true about librarians, but the point is this predictive text, this, quote, artificial intelligence, has been going on for a very long time, right? That's almost 20 years ago. In fact, we could talk about artificial intelligence all the way back in the 1950s. You've probably heard of folks like Alan Turing and the Turing test. That's 1950, right? So that's 75 years ago that we've been talking about this. So this AI stuff has been around for a while. Here's another example. I drew this on my computer. What am I going to draw? A house, right? Because we've seen people a million times, even bad drawers like me, start to draw houses this way. So we've moved from basic text prediction to basic image prediction. And we could go to this tool. I won't go to it right now, but I'd encourage you to, where you can go and it will say, the computer will say, draw a house. And when I start to draw it, a computer that doesn't know that will start to guess what I'm drawing. And so very quickly it can figure out what you're drawing because it also has seen people draw houses millions of times before. Another tool that's kind of fun to play, by the way, you can get these slides, so don't feel like you need to remember any of this, is a tool where it will say, draw a face, and I will start to draw the face, and it will finish the drawing for me, right? Because again, just like you guys did with my house, they understand the basic building structure of a house. So we've moved from like predictive text into predictive imagery, which is pretty cool. Now, one of the things that's a little bit different about this and kind of moves into the world of what we might call machine learning is that we set up the rules of the game, and then as the game plays out, the machine gets better and smarter at this. This is one of the reasons that tools are advancing so quickly. So a way to think about this is your spam filters. Anyone ever used email? Yes. Okay. Anyone gotten an email that it said was spam, but you were like, that is not spam, I need that, right? This has happened. Or things that you thought the spam filter should have caught, but it did not, right? And so what do? You pick it up and you move it into the spam filter. Every time you do that, you are teaching the machine more and more about what you particularly think spam is, right? So the engineers at Google or Hotmail or whatever set up some basic rules for what spam is, but as you interact with the tool, you are teaching it more and more, right? This is an important lesson for digital technologies in general. Every time you use that Waze app, right? Who uses Waze? Everybody, right? And Waze tells you should turn left, and you're like, no. I've lived in Buckhead my entire life. I know the right way is to go right, yes? And in fact, you do it, and you're validated by the fact that it's faster. This all happens, right? You are retraining the Waze algorithm, right? And saying maybe right is the right way to go. Now, the little hook I like to always tell my students is, why did Waze originally tell you to turn left? Try. We don't know. Waze has never told you why left is the right way to go. Who owns Waze? Google, right? Maybe Waze told you to turn left because the company that you're going to drive by when you turn left paid Google a little bit of money to send more traffic its way, right? Is that the case? I don't know. This is the point, is there's an opacity to the algorithm that you just don't know. Now, so my point here with the algorithms is you are playing a role in retraining them, right? So this is one of the things that differs from kind of the general artificial intelligence that they were talking about decades ago to these new machine learning tools is that we, as participants, are in fact training the algorithm. So the first question we have to ask when we're looking at general AI is, if this stuff has been around forever, why is it only popping up in the news now, right? We started hearing about this ChatGPT fancy stuff like 2 or 3 years ago. Why now? Well, I would say there are 3 basic reasons for why. The first is computers have gotten a heck of a lot faster, right? Any computer science nerds back from the 1970s? Come on, guys, you're breaking my heart. Moore's Law? Moore's Law. Decades ago, this guy named Moore said, I'm betting about 18 months, every 18 months, computing power is going to double. And if you follow this chart, he was absolutely right. So computing power from the 1970s, early Intel chips, all the way up to today, has just gotten so much faster, right? So it's not like we invented a fancy algorithm 2 years ago that allows us to do this. We've had the tools, they got a lot faster, right? I'm trying to see if we can play this video because I think it's fantastic, but let's see if it works.
All right, I introduce to you Leonardo, and he's going to paint a picture for you guys in the way that a CPU might do it, as a series of discrete actions.
All right, CPU is like the way computers were a few years ago.
3, 2, 1. Let me speed it up.
Okay, so that's how computers worked until a few years ago, a kind of one after another instruction or task, okay?
2.0. When we hit this trigger on this thing, 2,100 gallons of air goes through these accumulators, out these valves, into all 1,100 of these tubes, into these tubes in which the bottom of is a paintball. Each of those paintballs will fly across 7 feet of space and in 80 milliseconds reach its target, hopefully. When it's all said and done, it's going to paint the Mona Lisa.
GPU painting.
So this is a demonstration of GPUs, the kind of new thing. NVIDIA, you've heard of them? This is the difference between what CPUs and GPUs do.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Okay, so fun, neat demo, but the point is computers have really taken off. So I would argue the reason you're starting to see all these headlines is first, because of computers. Second is storage. How do you store this data has gotten so much cheaper. So this is a chart showing how much money it costs to store a terabyte of data. 1956, it was over $100 trillion, right? All the way down here to 2023, and it is a few dollars. You could go out to Best Buy right now and buy a terabyte disk for probably $25, right? So very quickly, we have super fast computers, and we have all of this essentially free storage. And then the big thing is, what are we storing? Well, you are guilty for what we have now because you are putting all of this data out into the world, right? So this is a graphic that shows you every minute of every day, all of the stuff that is happening, right? So every minute, Netflix subscribers streamed 362,962 hours of content. Every minute, me and my colleagues are sending 1.04 million messages on Slack. We have people downloading apps, we have Snapchat images, all that kind of stuff. Text, all your text messages, all of your emails. So we have super fast computers, we have all of this capacity to store it, and then all of us have just been feeding the machine with all of this data, right? So again, AI is not a revolution that happened because some smart people in Silicon Valley invented something 5 years ago. It's been happening for a long time, and we're kind of at a nodal point where all of this can happen. So we talked a little bit about machine data training. There it all is, right? We've all put it out there for the machines. So what you have is these tools that used to just be librarians are hot, expensive, whatever, are now getting incredibly good. So here's an example of a tool called DALL-E, which is owned by OpenAI, which is a kind of image generating tool, where they fed the descriptions that J.K. Rowling gave of her characters in the Harry Potter novels. And what you see on the left is what Warner Brothers did in terms of interpreting them. And on the right, you have falsely generated images by AI based on those descriptions. So instead of just my rudimentary drawings, now the machines can generate very real-looking images. And you can decide whether Warner Brothers got it right or not. So the tools are getting really good now because of this speed of processors, because of the storage, and because of the data we've given them. They're getting really practical. So I'm just going to play this really quickly. So this is image recognition software, right? So just looking at this video, the computer's able to figure out what everything is, right? You see that? Any of you have cars with fancy self-driving? Yes? Tesla drivers in the house? This is exactly what's happening, right? So when the Tesla goes down the road, this algorithm is running and saying, oh, that's a person, that's a tree, that's a stop sign, and then it is behaving accordingly to what it thinks those things should do. You could go to GitHub right now, download this thing, and you and I could probably talk for 15 minutes, and you could build that. It's really remarkable how easy it is to do this stuff now. Let's see if I can get to the next slide. So they're getting really cool. They're allowing us to do practical things. They're also getting potentially life-changing. So here's a video that I would commend you to watch on YouTube, where the AI has seen all of the moles that doctors have ever looked at, right? And it knows which ones turned out to be cancerous and which ones did not, right? So you might imagine a very cool tool would be to take a picture of a mole and say, with certain percentage surety, I can say that this is probably cancerous, right? And in fact, this is happening. So if any of you work in the medical field, you know there's a great debate about this, but AI is starting to play a role in diagnostic functions in the medical world. These tools can also, of course, get incredibly dangerous. So this is from a website, Which Face is Real? And I could ask you to figure out, one of these is AI generated and one of them is real. Now, some of you are going to get really smart and be like, haha, I can start to see the tells of the AI, right? Very quickly, if not already, the distinction will not exist, right? The machines will be able to generate pictures as real as any picture that I could take right now. Now, you want to get yourself really worked up and freaked out, start to think of the implications of that. Not just for pictures, video, audio. Put it in a really scary political sense, right? Someone generates a video of a politician doing something, and we're in a world where we don't know what is real and what is not, because the machines have gotten so powerful, right? Now, what's that?
Which was the real one?
Oh, that's a good question. This is the fake one. That's the real one. You could go and you can play this all day long if you really want to kill some time. It's fun. There's also a website, thispersondoesnotexist.com, which just generates images over and over again. Now, for nerds like me, this becomes pretty exciting because these tools raise really deep, interesting questions. So this is a video I commend to you, there's links at the end, called The Next Rembrandt, where art historians took all of the Rembrandt paintings that exist, they did 3D scans of them, they fed them into a computer, and they had the computer 3D print a new Rembrandt painting. And they showed it to art historians, and art historians said, absolutely, I would believe this is a Rembrandt if you just brought it to me. Now that raises a really interesting question of like, what makes a Rembrandt, right? Is it the aesthetic beauty of the painting? Is it the story behind it? Is it just the market has decided that Rembrandt should be valuable, right? So kind of interesting philosophical questions because we can invent these tools now. And then of course, I said we wouldn't mention the Bible, but here we're gonna mention the Bible very quickly. Rebecca walked in, so we had to start mentioning the Bible. Interesting theological questions are going to pop up really quickly. Has anyone seen, this was on NPR last week, it got a lot of press. There are videos, if you go to this YouTube channel, this group has started to make AI-generated videos based on biblical texts. They are wild. I commend you to watch them, but like, brace yourself, because they're pretty intense. But it raises really interesting questions when you start to have the ability to, quote, show you what the text is telling you. Now, lots of interesting things to talk about. If you move from text, which necessarily have gaps that we as readers tend to fill in as we read, and then you move to video, right? It has to answer certain questions and depict certain things. The other thing I would say is there's deep embedded theologies in this video that may not be apparent. So, for example, there's a great video about the Nephilim. I mean, anything to anybody? Old Testament scholar in the house. Genesis 6 story, the kind of giants wandering the earth. Anyway, the Nephilim destroy the dinosaurs, right? So right there you have embedded in there a assumption that humans and dinosaurs were living at the same time, right? So these kind of embedded theologies that may flow in. Now, how does the machine know that, or why does the machine know that? That's an interesting thing to think about. But you see very quickly that this is spilling over into the kind of religious church theological space. Okay. So first, we just kind of said, here is what is AI. Now I want to move into a question about how we should start to think about some of these tools. Question number one I would always ask, and this is for adopting any tool, whether it's like, should I use my smartphone or whether I should use ChatGPT, is what are you replacing when you use this tool? A good piece in The Atlantic about 2 weeks ago, written by a high school student, that is lamenting the fact, I mean, this is a pretty self-aware high school student, that because this AI stuff is everywhere in his classes, he already gets a sense that he's missing out on education, right? And we as parents know that, and we can tell our students that. I think it's pretty important that the students are actually starting to recognize that. I went to curriculum night for my kids' high school last week, and every single high school student, that's the first thing they started with. Not like, here's my AI policy, but like, I am freaked out about these AI tools. I need your help as a parent to help me do this. So when we move into these spaces with these tools, there is a loss and we are replacing things. This was a piece last week, at the end of last week, that was arguing that colleges should ban these tools from their campuses. Like, do everything they can to not let the networks actually use these tools. I would argue that's kind of a fool's errand because the kids are always going to find a way to use them. But there is starting to be concern that we used to always complain the kids can't write anymore. Now we, I think, have a legit complaint that kids can't write because they're actually not writing. So here's a quote. This is from an Atlantic piece I linked to earlier. We should insist on AI that can collaborate with, say, doctors, as well as teachers, lawyers, building contractors, and many others, instead of AI that aims to automate them out of a job. And I would take this down to the kind of individual personal decision to say, when you are deciding whether or not something is appropriate, ask, is it collaborating with what I know and what I can do, or is it replacing? And we have to think about what replacement means. So let's look a little bit historically. Here are some examples. I would argue some replacement technologies. The toll booth, right? We used to have an individual that sat in the toll booth and took the money and gave the change. We've pretty much replaced that job with automated toll booths. Now, sorry for any former toll booth workers here, but probably a net gain for society, right? There's some efficiency gain there that's probably okay. And hopefully they were reskilled and the toll booth operators. ATMs, another good example, right? Now, when ATMs came out in the 1970s and the 1980s, there was great concern that there were going to be no more tellers. Do you know what happened? There became more tellers, right? Why did that happen? Probably because it became a lot more affordable for banks to open up more branches, so they opened up more branches and they had more tellers. But on the whole, now we've started to see a kind of downslope of tellers. So there's a lot that you used to do at your bank window that you can now do with the machine. And again, no offense to the tellers, I would say that's probably a good use of technology. Dishwasher, I think, is an excellent use of technology, right? We don't have to, my children don't know what that is, but you don't have to. So these are examples of where replacement has happened, and we can decide whether those are good or bad things. Collaboration technologies are things that enhance the skills and abilities that humans already have. So a chainsaw is a good example. That might be changing soon, but like right now, a chainsaw can't operate on its own, right? So you have to have someone who's skilled and understands how to use the tool appropriately. A computer, when used properly, I would say could be a collaboration technology. It doesn't replace what I do yet, but I can do what I do more efficiently with the tool. And then a stethoscope, right? In general, a stethoscope on its own is not much help, but in the hands of an expert can actually enhance what that expert can do. So this is the kind of framework that we might think about some of these tools. So that's the first thing, is a kind of general framework for decision making. Second is we need to ask, how does the machine know what it purports to know, right? What is the data that trained this machine? So let's do some visual examples here. So I asked ChatGPT to generate an image of a Presbyterian pastor at a big church in Atlanta. And there he is, right? And I stress there he is, right? He is white, he is male, and he is, we'll say, older, right? So this may be an accurate reflection of Presbyterian pastors in Atlanta. It's certainly not an accurate depiction of Presbyterian pastors at Trinity. But we have to ask, why does it think this, right? Now, I hate to tell you, but I asked about the Methodist, and he's a lot younger and cooler than the Presbyterian. So, but I mean, that's interesting to ask why. Why does the machine think that? We don't know, right? Now, and to not just harp on other folks, I said, what is an image of an academic librarian? Here I am. Now, you see a few things, right? There's a cardigan, of course. I own 0 cardigans. It is female, youngish, carrying books, these kinds of things. So again, all it is doing is saying, iMachine, what do I know about academic librarians? From all the images I've seen, from all the texts I've read, and let me generate the generic answer for that. I put you guys to the test, and I said, generate an image of a member of a large Presbyterian church in Atlanta. There you are. What I found fascinating about this is every iteration of this question, an African-American woman came up. Now, I don't know why that is the case, but I switched it and I said, all right, well, tell me instead of Atlanta, tell me Boston, and we got this white dude, right? So, again, I'm not making any claim to know why this is the case. That's actually the very point, is you also don't know why this is the case. You're relying on this general data. I couldn't help myself, so I asked also what a PCA member looked like, and then I really couldn't help myself, and I had the PCA member and the PCUSA member box each other. I think the PCUSA is winning, but I can't really interpret it. The point I want to say is there's all this data out there that these machines have been trained on, and we need to think carefully about what is that data. Just to give you an example, in the academic space, a lot of people talk about generating syllabi using ChatGPT. You know, faculty are busy, they're off in the summer, they're coming back for that fall semester, and they didn't really get around to generating that syllabus, so they'll just get the machine to do it. And the machine is quite good at doing it. But if you look carefully, for example, in the world of theology, the syllabi that it generates look like syllabi from seminaries 10, 15, 20 years ago. And that makes sense because all of these tools are retrospective. They're looking back at the data that they've generated before. Now, I hope, and sometimes think, the way that we teach theology has changed over the last 10 or 15 years, right? And so if you just rely on these tools, you're always kind of looking backward at the kind of general average of the past. This is required reading. There's required reading at the end. This is the only book. You have to read the entire book. I know none of you are going to do that, but I do commend it to you. Sophia Noble is an information specialist. She teaches at UCLA. This book was written several years ago, 2018, I think. And she was looking at Google search results. So you know, for example, that if I search something on Google and you search something on Google, we may get different results, right? And that's because the machine is trying to give me what it thinks I want to know. And so that data that the machine is using, in her case for search engine results, but also true for AI, is biased and is based on what the world thought about stuff in the past. Sophia Noble was looking at the ways in which black women were depicted in search engine results, and it was horrific. And sadly, we probably shouldn't be surprised that it was horrific because the way in which culture was talking about black women in our past was horrific, right? And so again, when you think about these tools being a reflection of the past, you have to realize that all of the warts of the past come with these tools. And that can be really dangerous and something to carefully think about. If you want the short version of this, she gave a great 14-minute TED Talk that you can look to on YouTube. Same basic point. But you should read the book too. So that is kind of sub-question 2 was to think, or B was to think about what is the data. And then 3, I want to give a nod to, as fun and neat and cool as these tools can be, there are all sorts of hidden costs with them. The most obvious of these is the environmental cost. Now, I'll put this article up here on the left because for those who are concerned about the environment, I'm one of them, tremendous concern. The power used, the water used, all of this to train and to operate these tools is tremendous. But let's just pretend we're in a world where we don't care at all about the environment. Who's seen their Georgia power rates go up in the last 18 months? 6, 7 times, I think. One of the reasons, not the only reason, is all of these cool data centers that we keep hearing about that are being attracted to Georgia, right? What you may not know is that the data centers often pay lower power rates than you do because we offer those incentives for them to come to the state. And in order to make up that, the consumer power rates are going up, right? Now, I would say another thing that's really frustrating about that is how many jobs do these data centers bring to the state of Georgia? 2, right? It's like the guy who turns the lights on and the person who turns the lights on. So, whatever we want to say about what's happening, the costs and real economic costs and environmental costs are tremendous for these tools. Now, that's not a reason I would say to stop using them, but it has to enter into the calculus that we use when we make a decision about whether we want to recommend them or use them ourselves. So I've talked a little bit about what AI is. I've talked a little bit about the framework and costs associated with it. Now I want to look quickly at a couple of uses of AI tools, specific tools that I think fit some of this kind of cost-benefit analysis for me. And I think that's the really important piece. They work for me, and so it's a way to kind of get you to think about what works for you. Here's an example. ChatGPT as what I would call the world's best interlocutor. Great academic word, interlocutor. Everybody use it tonight. Okay, I asked ChatGPT, quote, I think that contemporary worship music is not the best form of church, but I'd like to have a debate about it so that I can consider whether my position is correct. Can you start by giving me the 3 strongest arguments for contemporary worship music, right? Now, we're not entering into the worship world here. There's a right answer and a wrong answer, but we won't get into that. The point is, if I have a particular position, what better way to strengthen my position than to hear the steel man argument from the other side, right? And that's what a tool like this can really do. So I often have my students write a short essay about something they feel passionately about, whatever it is, and then go have this debate, and then reflect on whether this strengthened, weakened, whatever their position before, right? So this can be a wonderful thing if you're kind of uninformed on a particular topic and don't necessarily want to have an open conversation about it. Maybe it's a controversial subject. These tools can be really helpful because they know the best of what's out there on the other side. You can see it goes on forever. It's really quite it didn't change my position, but it was really a quite helpful discussion about what's going on. So the first thing I would commend these tools to you, if it makes sense in your context, is to use the tool as a helpful debate partner. Whoops. Second is I work in a library where you do a lot of spreadsheets. How many gets to deal with spreadsheets in their lives? Good times. How many can do pivot tables as well as I can? Yeah, okay. This tool is remarkably better at Excel than I am, right? I would say I probably don't need to do pivot tables ever again in my life, right? Here is what I did. I work in a library, so this is a list of every loan that we've made since September 1st, 2022. It goes on for a long time. And I just uploaded in ChatGPT, and I was just like, what should I think about all this stuff, right? So it gives me some basic trends, like month by month, how many loans that we're making. It said, here are the key trends that it tells me. Then I say, what policies, what suggestion would you have based on this data? And it tells me, graduate students are doing most of the stuff, and so maybe I could expand tailored services to graduate students. Maybe I could shift my hours based on when loans are happening. I asked it to give me some fancy charts that I could do that. And it shows me, for example, faculty borrowing declined sharply from fiscal year 22 forward. Did you know that? Yeah, you're still checking out books? Okay. But the point is, this entire exercise probably took 45 seconds, right? I could have done all of this myself. It would have taken a week, right? And so for me, if I can have confidence in the data, and if I think knowing pivot tables for the rest of my life is probably not that essential for what I'm going to do, then I would see this as an effective use of the tools. Now, I have certain understanding of the data that came with kind of my experience working as a librarian. I wouldn't hand this to a first-year library school student and say, look, you never have to learn how to use Excel again. But for me, this kind of tool is quite helpful. Notebook LM, anyone ever familiar with this tool? This is a Google tool. This is one of my favorites. It is basically, you can upload all kinds of data into it and start to ask it questions. So in this case, I took 35 articles that I had, scholarly articles about Galatians 1 and 2, and I uploaded them in, and I said, frankly, I do not want to read these 35 articles, right? I wrote a dissertation on Galatians. I feel like I have a pretty good sense of what's going on in Galatian scholarship, but I was able to start asking it questions. So in this case, I said, in these articles, what is the general consensus about the faith of Christ statement in Galatians? That's kind of a debated topic in Galatians 1 and 2. And it gives you remarkably clear, and again, I know this stuff, so I can read it and say, remarkably good explanation of what's going on in the debate. I did a similar thing with the Bible. I took each of these is a book of the Bible from the New International Version, and I uploaded that, and I said, hey, will you generate for me a detailed timeline of the main events in the Bible? Remarkably good. We no longer need the Joel Lamans of the world to write introductions to the Old Testament, because there it is right there. I'm not done picking on you, hold on. I asked it, what does the Bible have to say about the sins of the Father being the sins of the Son? Right? You may know this is an important topic in biblical scholarship because there may be differing views based on different parts of the Old Testament. It nailed it, right? It knew which text to point me to talk about intergenerational consequences and punishments. It talked about texts that have emphasis on individual accountability. So it's able to take that data that I gave it, the text, and find these things for basic exegesis starting questions that I might ask it. Okay, this is where I come to you. Now, our colleague Joel Lamans is very prolific and does really interesting stuff. I mean that seriously. But I was kind of curious, like, what does Joel actually do? Like, what is his work, right? So I went and I downloaded some of recent publications from Joel, and I plugged it into Notebook LM, and it gives you a nice little summary there, but it's a lot more fun than that. So, what? Actually, that's a really good question we could talk about. But I said, give me a podcast talking about Joel's scholarship.
This is where we take a whole stack of fascinating material and boil it down to the really key insights, just for you. And today, we're diving into something pretty unique. We'll be looking at how ancient texts, and believe it or not, modern jazz, can reveal these surprising layers of meaning if you just, look a bit closer. Our mission, like always, is to guide you through this really remarkable collection of insights from scholar Joel M. Lemon. We want to help you grasp what's truly important here and why it might matter to how you see things.
Yeah, and the thread Dr. Lemon weaves through all this. It's really compelling. His work consistently points to the often overlooked power of iconography. That's visual imagery, basically.
Okay, we could go on for another 17 minutes. That podcast does not exist, right? It generated that podcast, was the script of it as well as the voices of it. And I actually listened to the whole thing, and it's actually quite a good summary of the work that Joel's doing. What's interesting is like, a lot of these articles are in a kind of similar strain, like a similar kind of, but some are not. Some are like way over here, and it kind of ties all those things together. So, somewhat silly example, but the point I'm making is you could take a bunch of text that you don't necessarily want to wade through, you can offload it onto the machine, and you can actually learn quite a bit from this tool. Thanks for being a good sport, Joel. The question about who's getting paid for that actually is a really important question. Joel's probably thinking about that right now. Okay, so we've done a basic introduction. We have about 5 or 10 minutes before I know we all need to go to church. So I just want to ask, what do you think, as a kind of basic question? Now, to guide that, I'm going to just give you a few questions to consider, both now but on one. First is, how would you feel, of course, this is the sucker question, how would you feel if you learned your preacher were using ChatGPT? We can think about that. I don't think she is. No, okay. Second is this, and this is where we're going to head next week, is this any different than technologies that have come before? I suggest it is, and we can talk about why that is. Third is this general sense of like, this stuff's all happening. What is the church going to do? Like stand up and be like, no AI, and then that's going to stop it. So maybe resistance is futile. And then here's the big one for me is, do we as Christians respond differently than the, quote, average citizen? Is our responsibility somewhat different because of our faith claims? So we're going to talk about that, but I do want you to get your homework. There's required reading that I'll mention in a second. There's required watching at some of those fun videos we looked at. But I do really want you to think about playing around with this stuff. Because, I mean, I think just straight up as a parent, to understand the power of these tools is really important before you can kind of have that conversation with your kids. So I would commend that to you. So talk to them about it, and then to ponder in your heart the things that we've talked about. Here's your required reading. Here's your required watching. As a prelude, if you're really super excited student, there's a podcast about the impact of the printing press, which is one of the technologies we'll talk about next week. You could listen to that podcast if you want. And then there's a big AI conversation coming up at Emory later. This is a shameless self-plug that I will commend to you as well. We'll talk about that later as well. Okay, but for about 5 minutes that we have now, let me just pause here, ask what questions you have, whether they are around this or rather some of the other things that I've talked about here. Yes, sir? We got a microphone. Thank you.
Just brilliant talk. Thank you so much for this and what's to come. What about the algorithms, the tools that exist to distinguish between an original work by a student and a chat GPT, like the complexity index or the burstiness index? Don't those work?
Yeah. It's a great question, and the schools are always hoping that they will work, yes? So up until about 3 or 4 years ago, they were great. We had tools like Turnitin, right? That could very quickly say, oh, I've seen this before in the world of the internet. You student got that. Nowadays, there are maybe some tells that you could say this feels like ChatGPT. But again, I would say from a kind of punitive standpoint, there's no way to prove that, right? Because the text is being generated. And so I think the place that faculty are often directed to and I think have to go is like knowing your student. And so the tell for me is not this looks like ChatGPT. It's like I know this student and how they write. This feels wildly different, right? Better, worse, more generic, whatever. So I think we have to rely on those kind of human algorithms now because, and there's been a lot of study around these like AI detectors, and they're really not that effective. So I don't have a lot of hope in the kind of tools, more so in the kind of know your students.
And can I just add to that?
Yes, please.
We have a daughter that teaches at North Atlanta, and they, because of the cheating epidemic around it, she's a math teacher, they have to turn their cell phones in when they walk in the room.
Yeah.
Because the kids, so they have to actually show their work.
Yep.
So the
Yeah.
schools are on making the kids actually do the work versus
Yeah.
being able to rely on ChatGPT.
I think that's right. The problem, right, is then they go home, right? And yeah.
And to your point, they're not learning to think critically when they can just easily access the information. And that is the struggle that I'm sure all teachers are feeling. Like, I want you to have to think about how to learn the material and why it means something, as opposed to just look it up and there's somebody's opinion.
Yep. No, that's right. The appeal to kind of like, why are you here and what are we trying to do, I think is where we have to go. Yes, sir.
Is the stuff that you uploaded available universally?
That's a great question. The last example I gave of Dr. Lavon's stuff is no, right? That I got that from an academic database that I downloaded and uploaded that. The rest of the stuff, I mean, it was my data example. The articles I got actually were from the same thing. So I guess the short answer to your question is no. Most of the stuff that I uploaded to train it were academic, licensed materials that are behind a paywall.
So it's just for you, not for me.
Right, so actually what I've done, you probably can't go and see the results of what I've seen. No, I mean, I could share you the results. But yeah, it's not out in a kind of public forum now.
But does Joel's work then live on in the world of the computer system to train for other purposes?
Excellent question. Likely, yes. I would argue that Joel's work, even though it's behind a paywall, probably is already fed into these algorithms. But I'll just give you a quick example. We have a faculty colleague who recently came to us in the library and said, my publisher is asking me, do I want to license my book for the machines to read, right? And this is a tricky question because on the one hand, you might think, well, no, of course not. I want people to read my book. But if we're moving into a world where knowledge is going to be generated based on the machines, then I actually want that faculty member's book in the machine because I know that she knows what she's talking about, right? So we're in a very tricky place in terms of, and publishers are really feeling this, right? It's like, how much control do we want to keep on information? Because by controlling it, we can say, this is special, important, siloed, rather than the kind of general mass that's out there. But if people are moving into the general mass anyway, then we kind of want that siloed information to be a part of the conversation. So it's really tricky from a technical standpoint to answer your question, what's out there, but also from a general kind of philosophical point. Yeah. Yes, sir.
It seems to me that it's important for, let's say, high school and university students today to learn how AI systems are built, what's behind the screen, and to take that knowledge forward in addition to how do I use it best to write a theme. Is that happening? Are these courses available increasingly? Are they being required in college curricula, or what's the state of that?
Yeah, I can't speak on a kind of broad swath about what's required and what's available. I will say a couple of things. I think in general, there is an emphasis at university levels to teach students the general nature of what's happening here, right? That these machines are trained on specific data, that they are built by specific humans, those kinds of things. In terms of understanding how does a convolutional neural network work that builds, all that kind of fancy stuff, I think that's still in a pretty specialized domain of information. Now, if you want to get really scary, if you ask the engineers that built those tools how they work, many of them will say, I'm not actually sure, right? So we've kind of moved into a space where this is so complex, and because you can build a basic tool that sucks in data, but the amount of data that it's sucked in, the tools oftentimes start to do things that they don't predict. So that gets us into that weird AI 2027 world that I mentioned before. But I think that general societal awareness of how these tools work is something we really need to focus on and work on, because I think it's really important. Yes?
I should ask AI this question, but you're going to help me. Have you come across any psychological or neurological studies about the impact of AI and its lookalikes on the development of critical thinking in a human being?
Yeah, there is a lot of work on that, and I can send some of it to your way. But I think some of it is just common sense, right? How do all of us learn how to think critically, right? We think about something that we kind of have an informed idea about it, and then we have a debate with somebody about it, and you learn a little bit more about how to present your ideas, how to respond to other people's responses, right? And if we're not asking our students or our children to engage in that, they're not going to develop the critical thinking skills. So yes, I'll give you a funny example. It doesn't have to do with AI. London cab drivers. Anyone ever been to London? It's not the easiest city in the world to navigate, right? The London cab drivers, there's this famous almost 2-year process that you have to go through in order to become one, right? They did a study several years ago of the brains of London cab drivers, and they were bigger, more powerful, and different than the average human brain. Right? And that's not just because the smart people had decided to become cab drivers. It's because through the training process, their brains were rewired, right? So one of the things that kind of neurobiologists have shown is that the brain has a certain plasticity to it. And so what's crazy is my children's brains are different than my brain, right? Because they are digital natives and grew up in this kind of world, and I'm what they call a digital immigrant and did not. So yes, our brains can change, and the inputs that we put into them change our brains, right? Terrifying, interesting, but terrifying. Yeah.
One other thing you pointed out was that, for example, with the Galatians piece, that you already had the knowledge and expertise to know that what you had generated was actually accurate.
Yep.
And I think that's really important. And how do you impart that to your students and others?
No, that's absolutely right. And so, for example, I mentioned the New York Times this morning, there's a piece about financial guidance through. There was a great example where a guy had lost a bunch of money because a piece of news about NVIDIA that he invested in was actually a week old, that the machine didn't present as a week old, right? So there are times in which the machines can be dangerously wrong, right? And so you have to have a kind of core base of knowledge. So I would say to my students, not only does using these tools short circuit the kind of critical thinking development stuff, but the tools can be misplaced and wrong. Now, I would also say a published work can be misplaced and wrong as well. And so it depends on kind of having that both critical thinking skill, but a kind of basic sense of knowledge to understand.
And I think we're hearing Norman play us out like the Oscars here. So
we'll be back next week.
We'll be back for the next 2 weeks. One question I got was about the slides. If Bo will send them to me, I'll have them loaded up into the YouTube video. So if you go into Trinity Presbyterian YouTube videos, shameless plug, this session will be loaded up along with a link where you can download the slides for today.
This, by the way, is what it looks like as we keep the conversation going. That's me over there.
Or you can scan the QR code on your way out the door.
The QR code is also the slides.
Thanks, everyone.